c'était pas des émeutes, c'était la guerre.
People talk about riots, but for those of us who have to deal with it, it's war. Those people who stand in front of us, they're there to kill us. They have Molotov cocktails, they have cobbles, they come within 3 meters in front of us, they throw enormous slabs of pavement at us. They try to kill us, not to play with us. They're there to kill us.
That sounds awful. The videos have been awful. What in the world is going on in France? Joining me now, Connor Tomlinson, writer and presenter at lotuseaters.com. He's been with us several times before. Okay, Connor, I don't know France. I know that the videos I see are not good. That country, apparently there's been $1 billion in damage already. What is happening in France?
So on the 27th of June last month, the police pulled over a 17-year-old Algerian boy that's been identified as Nahel M for driving erratically at the early hours of the morning around 8 o'clock when kids would be going to school. And it shouldn't be surprising that he had this interaction with the police because unfortunately Nahel had 15 prior incidents with the police and 5 prior incidents where he got booked for not complying with police orders, and some of those interactions with the police before had charges including falsified license plates, driving without a license, and consuming and selling narcotics. So a profoundly unparented young man. And during this exchange, the police officers drew the gun on him because he tried to drive away, obviously worried about being arrested and charged again, and the police pulled the trigger. We have this from a few angles. We have it from, I believe, a balcony, and also in the wing mirror of the person in front of Nahel during the traffic stop. Now, there is a bit of a debate as to whether or not the police went too far. The French police, I know, are a little more heavy-handed than many other police. We saw videos of them firing tear gas at seated families during the COVID lockdowns, for example. So there is a genuine debate here as to whether or not the kid should have been shot. But what came next was inexcusable. His mother, the woman identifying herself as his mother, took to TikTok and called for a revolt. And what we saw was a lot of resentful Algerian men living in Paris and migrants from all around the world that have found France to be the world dumping ground before they board a boat at Calais and find themselves in my country, the UK, decided that this young man's death, as with George Floyd's in 2020, or as with Mark Duggan's in 2011 in London, was the catalyst for them to go and destroy the city that they feel no connection with and use it as an excuse to burn its monuments, steal from its stores, take angle grinders and circular saws to cash points and telegraph poles, and generally have some kind of besiege of the country that has taken them in, and rather naively thought that they would be just as well-spoken, polite Parisians as the rest of the people that were native to the place.
Why are there so many Algerians in France? Is that just about cultural enrichment? What's happening there?
So historically, I think it was about the 1850s, the French tried to annex part of Algeria because they believed they had a claim over the land. And during that time, and I'll preface this with saying none of this justifies the current Algerian counter-reaction, but during that time, many French atrocities were committed. There were civilians killed, there were rapes, all in the name of conquering the place. And around 1960, the French threw their hands up and said, sorry about that, we'll give citizenship to many Algerians as way of recompense. And so there is a large Algerian cohort existing within Paris. I think it's something about 3% of the population. And the problem they have there is not, as many post-colonial theorists on the left will say, that this is some kind of just revenge for the events that were wreaked on the ancestors of the current Algerians living in Paris, because the current Parisians did not commit those atrocities. But instead, it's a fault of the Parisian government from the 60s through to Emmanuel Macron now, the liberal mindset that people are just economic actors, or that overnight they can be convinced to ascribe to liberal democracy and be taken from one place in time and slotted into another, and there's no cultural incompatibilities. Instead, lots of Algerians probably conceive of themselves as the ancestors who have been aggrieved by the French and as bearers of civilization. As soon as one of their own is killed, this is a powder keg moment that all this ethnic resentment rises to the top. And the curious thing that happened, in 2021, I believe this film was released, on Netflix was a film called Athens. And this was prescient because it said that an Algerian boy eventually would be killed by the police and there would be an ethnic uprising and a civil war within France. And it actually valorized the Algerian militia that rose up and became the new head of Paris. So this was a thing that was foreseen by plenty of French people that are in the know. In 2021, there was an open letter written by France's top generals to Emmanuel Macron to say that mass migration from both Algeria and all of the other countries that have come in since the migrant crisis around 2015 is a cultural powder keg that will explode soon if they're not careful. And Macron just didn't pay attention.
Okay, so speaking of the generals, why has this not stopped, or has it been stopped? It doesn't appear to me that it's stopped at all. Why has France not stepped up and stopped all this?
Well, they've attempted to deploy about 50,000 police officers by now, I expect, and they've had thousands of arrests, even 100 in Belgium, because for some reason the Belgians deeply care about this Algerian boy killed in Paris. We all know it's just an excuse to loot and burn. Let's not be not cynical about this. Obviously, it's arrived at the elite's doorstep now. I believe the mayor of the small region of Paris that you played a clip of the police chief of, his house was attacked recently. Fireworks were set off inside his home, and his wife, trying to flee and protect their children, fell and broke her leg, which is tragic, of course. But again, I'd like to remind the politicians that this need not have happened had you put adequate safeguards and stopgaps on migration in the first place and not been so blind to attacks on your culture, like the Notre Dame burning down, which we still don't have a culprit for some reason. I think the willing blindness of this by politicians has come from the top, and I think it's the coming to fruition of a prophecy espoused by our old friend Klaus Schwab. We all know that he once said, during the Great Reset, we're going to see a very angry world, and that is because people have been imported from countries with different cultures into the West, Europe, the US, battery farmed in high-rises, had all of their commodities paid for by the native taxpayers, extracted en masse. And what ends up happening is these people who have no tether to the time and place they're living in decide, I will take what I can get, because if I am an economic extractor, well, if I'm impoverished, then I'm entitled to burn down the city and take what I feel entitled to. And so we're going through that transition phase, that angry world that Klaus Schwab predicted. And it seems like lots of the politicians who defer to his global order are happy for it to go on at the expense of their native citizens.
Where does it go from here? What about the native citizens?
Well, I have seen lots of native Parisians on various Twitter videos taking to the streets to try and defend their areas. And we saw this same sort of thing in 2011 in London. This was a very formative political event for me, because in 2011, a black man was shot, a man named Mark Duggan, by the police in London, which isn't something that happens very often because our police aren't armed, because he was disposing of a handgun. Now, his family came out and said the police had unjustly shot him and that this was all a hoax. And this rapidly evolved from protests in Tottenham, North London, to riots all throughout London, including Southeast London, where I live, and they came very close to my road. And the disturbing thing that happened there was that the English Defence League, which were a English ethnic vigilante group, decided to come out in masks and balaclavas and fight members of the roving gangs of largely minority youths that were smashing up shops and stealing from them. And so what we're going to end up seeing are militia groups segregated by ethnicity battling in the streets. And frankly, as a non-extremist, I'd rather that immigration policies were put in place and integration policies were put in place so that we don't see racial conflicts take place in cities in the West. And the sad thing that's happened currently is that in France, all Emmanuel Macron has suggested is to suppress TikTok. And so we're seeing that this is manufactured consent for the suppression of free speech and criticism online the elite already wanted. They are bending this tragedy to their will, just as, unfortunately, 2011's London riots were, because even though Boris Johnson was elected London mayor at the time and cracked down on knife crime, immigration policy wasn't changed. London's demographics changed. It became a minority English city. They elected Sadiq Khan, largely on the grounds of ethnicity, because of large Muslim enclaves in London. And he decided to stop and search because it was racist, and knife crime shoots back up. So I fear that unless native Parisians get a handle on this electorally and defend their city, that the problem will continue and we'll see even more violent conflicts than we're seeing now.
Connor, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Are you tired of watching your beloved nation fall prey to the insidious grip of communism? The Anti-Communist Manifesto by Jesse Kelly is the ultimate guide to fighting back against this destructive force. Discover the shocking truth about communism infiltrating our education system, corporations, and even environmental movements. Unmask the true agenda behind groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter and learn how to protect the United States from the most malicious enemy. With extensive documentation of past atrocities, you'll see the undeniable danger posed by this ideology. Arm yourself with knowledge and join the fight to preserve the American way of life. The Anti-Communist Manifesto, a new must-read book from Jesse Kelly. Get your copy today at jessekellybook.com or wherever books are sold.